Welcome. Today's lecture is on religion, non-religion, and secularism as concepts. Sociology, from its very inception, has been interested in studying religion. Religion has been one of the most pervasive and intrinsic aspects of society. Considering we have been learning about sociology and what sociology entails, we might have a brief understanding of how sociology deals with religion. So if we look at Émile Durkheim's functionalist view of religion, where he looks at religion as performing the function of a collective conscience of the society, he claims that social solidarity is made possible through religious rituals and religious functions, etc. Or let's look at Weber, who looks at the capitalist structures in society and how they are maintained and made possible through religion. Now, this lesson will not go into all the theories of religion that sociology has, but it would rather look at the concept of religion, non-religion, and secularism. Why look at them as concepts? What are concepts? Concept is an abstract idea generated from particular instances. They may be understood either as general tools of inquiry or the content or object of some specific inquiry. This means that in order to understand any field of research, we need to employ some concepts, and we need to first define and designate definitions for those concepts in the way in which we are using them. A concept is an aspect of thought, okay? It is a kind of unit. So it's a unit in terms of which one starts thinking. When we make an assertion, we usually predicate it on a concept. But concepts are not absolute units, right? They can be augmented, they can be diminished, adding, subtracting some features, depending upon the context in which we are using them. Thus, when we use the term concept to refer to religion or non-religion or secularism, we are automatically assuming that they do not have singular definitions or universal application, right? They can be changed at will. Why do we need to define religion at all, right? Or secularism, for instance. Now, before the scientific revolution or the Enlightenment, almost every aspect of society was under the purview of religion. The church not only dictated one's spiritual life, but also one's domestic duties and behavior. All the big questions of life were answered by religion. Questions regarding your existence, questions regarding your body, questions regarding your mind, questions regarding the earth. With the scientific revolution, these divine origin theories started being questioned. Some of the answers to the big questions were now being provided by science. And this meant that religion was gradually losing its overarching hold on the society. The world now had an existence beyond religiosity, which is why it was necessary to encompass the definition of religion, because there were things outside it that were possible. The world also started becoming a larger place. Now, by this, I mean that new territories were being discovered, right? Because there were enhancement in the way ships were being built. So there were travelers and explorers who went to new lands, to distant lands, and they noticed, they encountered people who practiced different kinds of religiosity. And therefore, it was important to create taxonomies that could help them categorize these practices for their own understanding. This led to an expansion of the conception of what religion entailed, and more generalized definitions started emerging. And these generalized definitions were necessary so that they could be used universally. So if I look at certain practices, in a different country, I can identify that as religion. As we go further, we shall also see that these generalizations were challenged, and different cultures, different societies claimed that they had multiple interpretations of religion and not only Christian view of it. But we will go on to that. Let's start with religion as a concept. The gradual relegation of religion outside the public sphere was also evident in the way that culture was being practiced. So if you look at this image in front of you, we can see how Western art, which was completely commissioned by the church to denote different biblical stories, it was now going beyond this divine imagery, and it was celebrating the everyday, it was celebrating the mundane. So see, one of the greatest events in biblical history is the creation of Adam, which is a work by Michelangelo. But the other work that you can see is the School of Athens by Raphael, which looks at, a discussion of Plato and Socrates, right, who are not divine figures. Now, the need to define religion basically emerged because there was a need to differentiate it from the other concepts, that were becoming equally popular, and the psyche of the Enlightenment individual was not limited to religious ideas and thoughts. Before I discuss the origin of the term religion, I would like to draw your attention to how we take for granted that the term religion can be used to define spiritual beliefs, cultures, practices universally. Right? It should be noted that religion is an English word, and it is taxonomically situated in the West. Okay? And the lexicon that we are using to understand different cultures in different spaces has been developed from a very narrow Western lens. And we will discuss this further along. But if we state it at the outset, it partially acquits us from Anglocentric discriminations. The term religion, like many other English words, has an origin in Latin. It comes from the Latin word religio. Now, religio, the term means scrupulousness, loosely translated. Scrupulousness means being extremely careful in doing something, or being very wary of wrongdoing, that I will do no wrong. Right? Now, the term religion or religio could also be translated to devotedness, to obligation, which may not have any divine relations. So this is why St. Augustine considered the term, but he rejected it. He said that we cannot use it to define how one worships, because it can easily be extended to include one's non-divine duties. So really, the term religion started being used frequently in writings in the post-Reformation period, okay, when the Christians were divided into two warring camps. It was a time when ecclesiastical thinkers were trying to bridge the gap between the two denominations, and they were trying to highlight the similarities that they had. So Edward Herbert proposed 5 common notions that could be identified as the key features in all kinds of faith. So they were the beliefs that there is a supreme deity, this deity should be worshipped, that the most important part of religious practice is the cultivation of virtue, that one should seek repentance for wrongdoing, and one is rewarded or punished in this life and the next. Now, as it should be clear, it is a very narrow monotheistic approach, and it should not give the impression that these thinkers were not aware of other kinds of religiosities that existed in the world. But true religion, according to them, could only be perceived from a Christian standpoint, right? As all other religions were only at a primal stage of development, and Christianity was the final revelation of God. One would assume that as the empires expanded through colonialism and the West started coming into direct contact with other cultures, the narrow monotheistic view of religion would be challenged. Quite contrarily, colonial encounters strengthened this position because the beliefs, the practices of the colonized were labeled as pagan, savage, barbaric. Anthropologists were extremely interested in studying the religions in different parts of the world outside the West. But they really did little to counter the superiority of Western religion over other magical, superstitious, animist, pagan practices. Edward B. Tyler resorted to a very minimalist definition of religion, where he claimed that religion was a belief in spiritual beings. Okay? And he had a very neutral disposition in establishing hierarchies between different kinds of beliefs and practices. But clearly, his evolutionary schema clarified his colonial leanings. It is same with Durkheim, where Durkheim's definition of religion as something that encompassed everything that a society might hold sacred. It had the potential for inclusivity. But he clearly believed that these primitive practices were a part of traditional societies and they could not be transposed into modernity. So anthropology was definitely a tool that was used to legitimize the logic of colonialism. Briefly, I want you to understand what this means. Now, the moment the anthropologist refers to the people they encounter as primitive or barbaric or savage, you are denying them the right to be present in the same place and in the same time which you are inhabiting, right? Johannes Fabian calls this the denial of coevalness. That is a way of seeing the world in which various contemporary societies are interpreted as literally living in different historical epochs. Right? So if you look at this, totemism is practiced by various tribes across the world. Yet totemism is supposed to be a primitive practice, which is not practiced now in the modern time. Considering that Christianity was the only true religion, it was a Christian duty to proselytize, right? Christian missionaries were sent to different parts of the world to salvage the primitive from the superstitious beliefs that impeded their progress and give them a sort of awakening. Jason Ananda Josephson Storm, in his book Invention of Religion in Japan, states how practices in Japan were being codified along the standards of a Western understanding of what a religion should look like for administrative purposes. So he argues that Shintoism, which is now called the religion of Japan, cannot be classified as a religion, and in doing so, we delimit its grandeur, we delimit the importance it has in the lives of the Japanese people. Most of the Asian beliefs and practices were related to a deep understanding of cosmologies that were different from the Christian interpretation of cosmology. Nature worship, something that was considered pagan, heretic, was a part of the cosmological understanding of ancient religions. So the interaction of the sacred and the profane was more common, it was more intense, and there was not really a complete separation of the two. Right? So the personification of nature as God was easier for them to believe than the personification of God himself. A more inclusive understanding of religion and the relation of religion to the cosmologies was required. So the concept of religion that we are talking about required changes, and it has historically changed. Now, let's look at some popular definitions, right? Max Muller claimed that religion is a mental faculty, or it is a disposition which enables man to apprehend the infinite. They are very similar. If you look at all the definitions, Galloway defines religion as man's faith in a power beyond himself. So there is a supernatural quality to it. Right? Hegel claims that knowledge possessed by the finite mind of its nature is absolute mind. So the supernatural power, man's faith in supernatural power, and to satisfy this power or establish a relationship with this particular power, he engages in worship and service. There are also negative definitions, such as Marx, who called religion as the ideological tool in the hands of the powerful capitalists. He calls it the opiate of the masses. Or, say, Sigmund Freud, who said that religion was a collective neurosis of mankind, and it was being used to repress and restrain certain impulses that came to human beings naturally. We may argue that religion has become disembedded in postmodern society. It is no longer embedded in religious organizations or in a particular country or culture, or the beliefs are not embedded in their original contexts. Now, people could now believe without really belonging. This means that universal definitions were not only impossible, because beliefs and practices are extremely variegated all over the world, but some scholars argued that it was immoral and discriminatory to even attempt a universalized definition of religion. We may quote Talal Asad to understand this more clearly. He wrote that there can be no universal definition of religion, not only because its constitutional elements and relationships are historically specific, but because the definition is itself the historical product of discursive processes, right? So worse yet, the definition authorizes particular forms of history making that are morally bad. So when we decide to discuss religion from a very narrow lens, from what I believe is religion, I need to identify that that belief has emerged through historically discursive practices, and it is not something that is universal and is not possible to become universal. So if you look at religion in India, and if we take the case of Hinduism, for instance, the problems of defining it as religion become very apparent, right? Often people have found that it is easier to project it as some call it the way of life, rather than a religious doctrine. Now, it was practiced differently in different parts of the country, depending upon a lot of things: the geographical terrain, the legends that were popular in that area, the history of that territory, the kind of rulers that they encountered. So the codification of Hinduism as a singular religion is very new, which is why there are constant conflicts between different practicing groups. There are sects and there are different cults. They want to establish their beliefs as paramount, right? So as a multi-faith country, there is a constant diffusion of religious practices, and often the way a particular religion is practiced in India may seem like a totally different religion, right? So there are Muslim caste groups, and if you go to Christian weddings, there you might see that the bride is not in her pristine white dress, but in a very ornate sari, right, where the groom is applying vermilion on the bride. So there is a certain diffusion that is very beautiful in India. So the moment we try to create narrow definitions of religion, we lose this diversity. There is also a certain romanticization of India and the religiosities that are practiced here, especially in Orientalist literature. So India is claimed as the land of the spiritual, where people come to sort of find themselves and enjoy the mystical elements that it offers. Now, it is economically quite beneficial, but this romanticized conception is far from the truth, because religiosities in India are embedded in its culture. And there is a gradual shift noticeable as religious identities are now exceedingly becoming more political than cultural. So as religion is understood differently in India, secularism too has to be shaped in a similar way to cater to the multi-faith and the diverse population that reside here. Before delving into non-religion, therefore, we will inspect secularism as a concept that developed in the West in opposition to the idea of religion. By 1851, George Holyoake, he began to use the word secularist to describe himself and his followers. And he defined secularism as a code of duty, which was pertaining to this life, and it was founded on purely human considerations, that it had nothing to do with the divine, right, or the metaphysical, so to say. Now, but if we need to understand secularism as a concept, so we keep on trying to define secularism, there are certain principles of secularism Jeremy Roddle spoke about, which are very popular. We will try and discuss these principles in tandem with India. The first principle is the institutional separation. This is the separation of religious and administrative affairs to the extent that equality can be promoted. Now, this institutional separation was specifically of separation of the church and state, but in India, of course, it was not possible because there was not one church, right? There is a difference between a monotheistic and a polytheistic country, also a country where multiple faiths are practiced, and the West is going through the same, let's say, troubles now, right, where they have to really increase their diversity bracket and be more inclusive. So in India, we do not practice a complete separation of the religious and the administrative, but we practice something that is called a principled distance, which we will discuss further along. Secondly, secularism means there would be a freedom of belief. Now, if we come to India, how does India ensure freedom of belief? Through its various articles in the Constitution, where Article 25 to 28, 25 talks about freedom of conscience, free profession, practice, propagation of religion, 26 talks about the freedom to manage religious affairs, 27, payment of taxes for promotion of any particular religion. You do not have to really pay the taxes. Article 28 talks about freedom as to attendance at religious instruction or religious worship in certain educational institutions. So if you look at various, there are now Saraswati Vidya Mandirs, the DAV, which is the Arya Samaj schools, or madrasas, etc. And certain educational institutions can also have religious instruction. The third one is no discrimination on the basis of religion. Now, this is constitutionally practiced in this country through Article 15, okay, which forbids discrimination on grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth. When we talk about secularism in India, it was inserted into the Constitution through the 42nd Amendment in 1976. It was not included at the very go because the constitution makers thought that this was something that was given. We will, of course, be a secular nation. But of course, there were communal riots and communal tensions rose when it was necessary to sort of constitutionally include it. In India, as Mahatma Gandhi claimed, that secularism is very similar to dharma nirapekshata. It is often associated with what we call Sarva Dharma Samabhava. It is essentially a Hindu concept. And it believes that religions might have different paths, but they have to reach an equal destination. Indian secularism draws from the traditional concept of everyone working together. And not really, we do not need to separate everything. We do not need to create a complete separation of state and religion, but we will respect all religions, we will tolerate all religions, we will not really have an official religion, we will be called a secular state, but we are going to be respectful to all religions. What we practice, Rajiv Bhargav has termed it principled distance. He explains that principled distance, we practice principled distance because the Indian secularism does not create a wall of separation, but it creates a proper distance, a calculated distance with the religious affairs. So it does not say that there are no boundaries, but that these boundaries are essentially porous. Right? An Indian state only intervenes in religious matters which are not essential practices of that religion. So grants to educational institutions, state interference on religious institutions that deny equal rights and equal dignity. You can take the example of, say, the Sabrimala temple verdict, where women are now legally allowed to enter the Sabrimala temple, or the triple talaq, where the government had to intervene, etc. So it will only intervene when certain rights are threatened. how do we practice secularism? Now, in this practicing secularism, this also we take from Bhargav. Bhargav talks about three kinds of secularism. One is constitutional secularism, which we just talked about, which is this principled distance. It has critical respect for all religions, and it is not blindly anti-religious. It respects religions. The second one is party political secularism. Now, this is a nefarious doctrine, really, that was born around 40 years ago and is practiced by all political parties, including the so-called secular forces. This talks about opportunism. It talks about opportunistic distance, not principled distance. So the government would intervene when it feels that this is a good opportunity to gain votes, right? So to create vote banks. And they are quite indifferent to the real problems of either the religious majority or the minority. The third one is ethical secularism, which really right now scholars are more concerned about ethical secularism, because there is a shift from the politically led project to a more socially driven movement for justice. Okay, it is beyond legal duties. It involves moral duties. It involves secularity. That is, how do we perform secularism? What do we mean when we talk about secularism? Is it enough to have constitutional secularism? Is it enough to have laws and rights and duties? Or is it something that should be constitutional in our own personalities to be secular beings? So it is actually why I started with secularism and I actually end with non-religion is because there is a continuity. It is through these discussions of ethical secularism that studies of non-religion started gaining popularity. Now, non-religion can only be studied in the context of religion. So non-religion is not everything, but some things that are related to religion but are not religious. So some have defined non-religion as the profane, the mundane, the everyday, something that is not sacred, right? But the concern on non-religion really began when a lot of people started identifying themselves as the nuns, that they were neither Hindu nor Muslim nor Christian, and they did not believe in being a part of any organized religion. So in a 2008 European survey, more than 23% of people said that they did not belong to a religion. So it was not only that increasing number of people were declaring themselves as non-religious, but also it was interesting to see that this group was very diverse. There were different kinds of people who were talking about this. It is as difficult to define non-religion as it is to define religion. So we often talk about the irreligious. The irreligious is neglect of religion, active rejection, absence of religion, non-affiliation with the church, any form of organized religion. Now, even if I am not engaged with any organized religion, I might practice what I might call spirituality, which has got nothing to do with divinity. It is, again, a very cosmological approach. Now, there are various forms of irreligiosity which are practiced, which we can discuss really. So atheism, which is the most common, which is a complete disbelief in the existence of gods and other deities. There is agnosticism, where I am not very sure whether they exist or not. And the agnostic atheists are the ones who say that because I am not sure whether gods and deities and supernatural entities exist, because it is unknowable, I am not going to believe in them. Then there is allatrism or allatry. It is a recognition of the existence of one or more gods, but with the deliberate lack of worship of any deity. So it includes the belief that religious rituals have no supernatural significance and that gods ignore all prayers and worship. So they are not people who say that there is no God, but there is a God, but he will not or she will not listen to me. Then there's free thought. Now, that free thought holds that positions regarding truth should be formed on the basis of logic, reason, empiricism, rather than authority, tradition, revelation, or other dogma. So free thought is really a child of the Enlightenment. Then there is agnosticism. Agnosticism or atheism is the idea that the question of the existence of God is meaningless because the word God itself has no coherent definition. So what do you mean when you are asking me whether there is God or not? What is God at all? Right? That is atheism. Secular humanism is a system of thought that prioritizes the individual, the human, rather than the supernatural or the divine. And there is another category that has emerged, which is called the SBNR, spiritual but not religious. It is a designation that was coined by Robert Fuller for people who reject traditional or organized religion, but they have very strong metaphysical beliefs. So they may be included under the definition of non-religion, but sometimes they are classified as completely distinct groups because they do believe in something which is higher than themselves, but they do not think that it is divine in nature. Irreligiosity and all of this that we discussed has led to a growing interest in the studies in non-religion, right? Beyond atheism, beyond agnosticism. So Thomas Coleman, Lois Lee are scholars that are now currently writing on non-religion, and they define non-religion in different ways. Coleman claims that proposes horizontal transcendence. Horizontal transcendence means that people might experience certain events that they find extremely meaningful, but they have nothing to do with divinity. Lois Lee claims that we can actually take existentialism as non-religion because we are asking existential questions, same questions that we were asking when we were religious in nature. But we are asking existential questions and we are not expecting divine answers. That is non-religion. But what about the people who are anti-existentialist? So this is a very murky area which is still being discussed. So there are many different definitions of this, but worldviews is something that everyone is now interested in, that we are, rather than talking about religion and non-religion, let's talk about worldviews. The concept emerged as a means of encompassing non-religious as well as religious outlooks. Right? The Interdisciplinary Worldviews Research Group, which was founded in Belgium, it offers a very promising approach. Okay, and it is grounded in certain fundamental philosophical questions. This group asks the big questions, the ones that we used to ask religion. What is? Ontological question. What is true and what is false? Epistemological question. What is good and what is evil? It's an axiological question. How should we act? It's a praxeological question. Where does it all come from? So what is the explanation that you give for everything that is happening? And where are we going? What are you predicting for the future? So the questions that were answered by religion should now be answered by worldviews, which actually might be different. So it has got nothing to do with religion or non-religion. Right? Defining worldviews in terms of big questions has several advantages. Firstly, it relieves scholars the obligation to define what religion and non-religion is. It helps us to analyze individuals and groups and how they characterize their answers to these big questions. Secondly, it provides a completely neutral starting point for analyzing worldviews that is not biased towards any religious categories. And thirdly, insofar as a case can be made that all humans have to answer these questions, it offers a basic comparison of cultures across time and space. Worldviews, as Lois Lee claims, worldview has been suggested as an alternative, but it is currently extremely under-theorized and it is very broad in scope. So, but non-religion studies might be subsumed under the worldview studies once more empirical and theoretical work can be done on it. Right? But in conclusion, we are still talking about religion. We are still talking about secularism and the prospect of it, whether it will even remain anymore globally, because it is facing a huge crisis. So we are really asking questions such as, is secularism really necessary? But the number of non-religious people is also growing. right? So what is the future of the studies of non-religion? This is why, and this is how I started, that we need to understand religion, non-religion, secularism as concepts first. Concepts that are to be employed in different capacities in different discussions, right? So we first need to tell people what we mean when we say that I'm talking about religion or non-religion or secularism, right? Thank you.